Yeah, they obviously would like you to go to therapy, but my only experience of it has been quite negative. It was very informal. It was in a checkup session with a doctor who I don't see anymore, and he said that he'd like to have therapy sessions with me, and then he sort of launched into just asking me questions that were very sort of, I thought, invasive, and he had sort of a very negative tone, and it ended with him basically saying, I don't think you're really mentally ill, I think you're just nervous and shy. And I remember leaving that just crying, thinking that my whole reality had changed, but I think I would be open to it now.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Dr. Sheri Jacobson, and this is TherapyLab, a podcast dedicated to therapy, thought, and the art of mental well-being. In this episode, we are joined by Chuck Mullin, an illustrator who won Digital Champion at the Mind Media Awards last year for her fantastic comic strip series conveying the dynamics of living with depression and anxiety. I'm looking forward to meeting her and finding out more about how she explores mental health issues through the prism of illustration. Hello, Chuck.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with a quick well-being check. How are you today? Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest of moods.
I think a 7. Yeah, pretty good.
Okay. Do you do that from time to time? Check in with yourself?
Sometimes, yeah. My New Year's resolution was to start journaling, and every day I'll sort of colour in a square to show how my mood is. I think it's important to keep track of that.
So I wonder if you can start by telling us a little bit about your work.
So I run a page called Chuck Draws Things on Facebook and Instagram and Tumblr, and also on Twitter. And I draw comics about pigeons, experience all the different things I experience with mental illness, like with depression and anxiety.
How long have you been doing that for?
I think almost 2 years. Maybe about a year and a half.
And take us through the process. How frequently do you produce them and what's behind it?
I try and do at least 2 a week, but it does sometimes depend on other things that I'm doing that week. So most of them are based off of experiences that I'll have sort of very recently. So they'll kind of whiz around in my head and I'll think about how I reacted to them, and then I'll just try and put them on the computer as a drawing instead.
And how did it start?
I've always loved drawing since I was little, and then after I graduated uni I would start drawing little comics, but with me as the emblem, about how much I hated working in retail and feeling like I had no purpose after university. And then I just started using pigeons instead. I was in the town centre one day and I saw some pigeons eating off the floor, and like an old couple walked by and they called them disgusting, and it made me really sad to imagine a pigeon understanding that. So I made a comic about a pigeon hearing that but feeling very still inspired in itself, and then people liked it, so I thought I'd just use them as emblems of what I experienced with mental illness.
And you're inspired by day-to-day events?
Yeah, definitely. It's that you can sort of tell what kind of mood I was in when I make them.
And you've grown quite a social media following. Do you ever get ideas from your viewers?
Sometimes, yeah. A lot. Some people do give ideas, and I try and base them mostly off what I go through, because I think it's a slippery slope when you start to generalise, because mental illness is very different for everyone. So I normally just go with things that I experience in particular, but sometimes they've been really good ideas that I can relate to.
Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that you're currently going through or have in recent times and how you've gotten through them?
I think the most recent challenge that I've had is that I work full time, and then I find myself quite tired a lot, and it's hard finding a balance between your regular work life and doing something that brings you joy and that I feel sort of a responsibility with producing comics. So I feel quite stressed sometimes, like I have to produce art and to sort of have my self-worth go up. And it's just a case of reminding yourself that it's fine to just take a back seat and chill out a bit, and not push myself if there's nothing coming.
And how well practiced are you at that? Are there times when you're not quite able to manage it?
Yeah, I could be better, yeah. But I think I'm getting better.
Would you be able to take us through some of your earlier experiences growing up?
Yeah, I think I've always sort of had anxious or depressed thoughts, but it wasn't until I got to university that I sort of started understanding more about them. And I think the way it came out when I was sort of in my teenage years was that I would be kind of eccentric, like the weird kid in school who loves cartoons and drawing. And then once I got to university and sort of graduated, it became a lot worse, I think, when I started to understand what it actually was. And since then, it's just been kind of like a slow uphill trek to trying to manage it and get better.
So do you remember what some of those anxious and depressed thoughts were as early as you could remember?
Yeah, I think when I first started going to university, I think everyone feels very isolated when you're away from home for the first time, but it felt very extreme, and it felt like no one would like me, I wouldn't have any friends, and just basically having no sense of self-worth and feeling like every time you talk to someone, your brain is like screaming at you that you're not making any sense or that you're stupid, and it's just kind of like constantly there.
And how were you dealing with it at the time? Because often we turn to behaviors which we think are going to be helpful, but ends up kind of fueling the issue, whether it's not interacting with people or an addictive behavior or avoidance.
Yeah, I think I never went out at university, so I think instead I sort of channeled it into working. So I would stay up until maybe 3 or 4 in the morning working sometimes, and just kind of doing anything to not hold myself up in my room.
Yeah. I can relate to the late night working pattern.
Yeah.
Definitely. It is a balm in a way. And what were the kinds of things that you reached out to in terms of social support or other structures at that time?
Yeah, I think it was quite difficult to start realising that I could talk to my friends about it. And for a while it was just talking about it, but only once I'd had a lot to drink or, after going out. Yeah. And then I think it was after I graduated, I thought it's not really good to do that. So I started seeing doctors and going on medication and trying more healthy behaviours instead.
So what was that route towards? Because often it's very difficult to make that first step of reaching out for support. Do you remember some of the background to that?
I think I'd gone through a very bad breakup. And I remember just before things kind of broke off, I was really drunk and I was just sort of sobbing hysterically to my friend. And I woke up the next morning and I was just thinking that's not, even when you're drunk, that's not a helpful way to channel your emotions. So that was kind of the first step to thinking I need to start thinking about my emotions more and not ignoring them or pushing them down, and seeking medical help as well.
And do you remember how you approached the GP? Was that just like a regular consultation? And what was the outcome of that meeting?
Yeah, I remember going to the doctor and just saying, I don't feel, I've struggled with these thoughts for a long time. And at first they just give you a quiz that you just have to do. And it took maybe 2 or 3 more of those visits before they started prescribing me medication. But I remember you feel like you really have to build yourself up to go. You're worried that, well, I was worried anyway, that I would just get dismissed or that people would think I was just making it up or I was just shy instead. So it does take a lot to kind of build yourself up even to go.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember what medication you were prescribed and what the effects were on you?
Yeah, so I'm still on the same one. I think I've been on it for about 2 years now, but on a bit of a higher dose. So I take citalopram. And I remember the first month was sort of just a really weird cycle of side effects. So first I couldn't sleep and then I'd sleep all the time. It made me sort of very jittery and sweaty. And one weird habit was grinding my teeth a lot. I woke up several times just because I was grinding my teeth so loudly. And then it just sort of petered off and I started feeling okay. So that was all right.
And then after that, were you recommended follow-up visits or any other or further interventions?
It was quite difficult because I've moved quite a lot since then, but I do try and go to the GP a lot just to have a regular checkup. And the current one I'm with is very nice, and I think I've got a follow-up next month just to see how things are going.
And were self-help books ever recommended? There's the books on prescription scheme. Was that ever passed your way?
Someone once recommended a book, I can't remember the full title, but it's The Dialectical Behaviour, something or other, of thinking more about how you think. But I remember using a wellbeing app as well to try and do a bit more meditation. I thought that helped quite a lot as well.
And was therapy ever discussed as part of your GP consultations?
Yeah, they obviously would like you to go to therapy, but my only experience of it has been quite negative. It was very informal. It was in a checkup session with a doctor who I don't see anymore, and he said that he'd like to have therapy sessions with me, but then he sort of launched into just asking me questions that were very sort of, I thought, invasive, and he had sort of a very negative tone, and it ended with him basically saying, I don't think you're really mentally ill, I think you're just nervous and shy. And I remember leaving that just crying, thinking that my whole reality had changed, but I think I would be open to it now. Yeah.
So was that a medical practitioner or was that a psychotherapist or psychologist?
It was just a GP checkup,
right, yeah. And so what makes you more open and receptive to it now? Have your perceptions of therapy adjusted, or?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, at the time, you obviously think it's the worst thing when it's happening to you like that, but I know, obviously, not every therapist is like that. And I don't really want to be on medication forever, so I think in the future, I would be open to it.
What do you hope it will give you? What are your preconceptions of how it might work?
I think the main reason why I've put off going to it is I really struggle sort of just talking about things, I think. Obviously, I channel it more into artistic mediums because it just seems easier than talking about it. So I feel like if they ask me a question, I just won't know how to answer. But obviously, it's a learning curve.
And then physically, how do you look after yourself, or do you struggle in that area?
I think physically is very hard, yeah. I feel quite tired a lot of the time, so I think I'm one of those people that will just get into bed and then I struggle to get back out. And also just in terms of like the gross thing about when you're mentally ill is you find it quite hard to take care of yourself. So sometimes I'll just be like, I haven't showered in a few days, I should probably do that. It's things like that, or like just brushing your teeth regularly that I think people don't quite realise you forget about.
Yeah. And have your attitudes towards yourself adjusted? In other words, did you ever beat yourself up over it, but now you give yourself some room for maneuver, or are you still very hard on yourself, would you say?
Yeah, I think I'm a lot better than I was, yeah. I think the way I try and think about it is I wouldn't say the things I think to myself to someone that I care about. So it's just kind of remembering that I should care about myself and I should be nice to myself every now and then. And I think especially there's sort of a general expectation that if you say nice things about yourself or you accept nice things about yourself, you're arrogant or vain, but that's not true. You should be nice to yourself.
I'm curious to know a little bit more about what it's like for you in the act of drawing. What are you experiencing at the time?
It's mostly I get all of it out in the before stage, so I won't start drawing until I've got a really detailed plan of how I want the comic to look, so that will be thinking about the text in every panel. And then that before part is mostly where it's kind of venting, and then when I'm actually drawing, it's nothing really going through my head. It's kind of like the last step of putting what I'm feeling into something else.
What's your experience of putting your work out online and interacting with your audience?
Yeah, it's quite overwhelming to sort of bear that part of yourself to people that you'll never see in real life. But it's kind of bittersweet in a way, knowing that there's loads of people out there that know what it's like to go through what you're going through, and that I think you just take a lot of comfort in knowing that you're not alone, that there are people out there that know what it's like, and that's really kind of warming to know.
I mean, on the receiving end, looking through the Instagram collection, and virtually everyone is relatable in some way. And it's kind of that sense of, like I can identify in some shape or form, and there's a connection to you, even though I hadn't met you prior to today. So, as a viewer, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Do you ever get overwhelmed in an unmanageable sense with social media in general and being online?
Yeah, definitely. I think the way that social media, I think, is set up is that it can make things easily shared, but I sometimes look and I've got so many notifications about comments that it's just, you can't go through all of them, and it makes me a bit upset knowing that I can't respond to all of them when people have taken time out of their day. So that's a bit overwhelming, but I'm still very grateful for it. It's a nice problem to have, I think.
Yeah. Tell us about the Mind Media Awards, how you got into that and the result.
Yeah, so Mind is a charity of mental health that's primarily based in London, and they have annual media awards. So they added a new category this year, Digital Champion, and you can put yourself forward and they shortlist based on a panel of judges. So I just thought there's no harm in putting myself there. And then I got shortlisted and I got to go to a lovely evening in the South Bank Centre where there were people like Stephen Fry was hosting and Stacey Solomon and loads of people who are on the TV and prominent in media, and I won. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How was it to win? Were you okay with the recognition? And
Yeah, I thought it would be very scary, but I found out later that there were 900 people there. But when you were on the stage, the light was so sort of bright that I just couldn't see anyone. So I was like, I'll just pretend there's no one there.
Yeah. And there's a lot of emphasis on youth mental health. Not only lots of charities working on it, but I think it's well documented that there's a rise of mental health issues amongst younger population. How do you suggest young people navigate their mental health in general? Any views?
I think if I could give my younger self advice, it would just be don't be afraid to open up about it. It's obviously a lot more prevalent than people think it is. So there's no shame in being honest with how you're feeling, whether it's talking to someone in real life or finding comfort in an online community. As long as you sort of get your emotions out there, I think that's really important.
What are the main challenges that you think they face today?
I think one of the biggest problems is there's this sort of, with the rise of social media, people think that it's just a trend or it's seen as cool to have a mental illness. So I think young people suffer a lot with the older generation not necessarily taking them seriously. And also with things like makeup and beauty being so prominent, I think it can be quite damaging to young people's perception of themselves as well. Seeing someone who's 18 and looking flawless all the time, that can be quite damaging when you realise that you're not really like that. So I think certain aspects of social media can be quite negative. But again, it's just talking about it, I think, is the most important thing.
And how can they look after themselves also online in terms of having critiques, would you say, and people who are maybe more vocal or cyberbullying? Yeah,
I think ultimately it's one of those things where it's quite hard to just accept that someone's being mean to you over a screen. You shouldn't take it to heart if someone is talking to you like that through something virtual. I think it's very important just to remember that you are worth something and that you shouldn't let anyone dismiss that just online.
Mm-hmm. Are there any well-being habits that you haven't yet tried but might consider that you've heard other people take up?
Well, I did try meditation for a bit, and I found, this obviously was in the early stages of me trying things like that, and I just found it very hard to clear my head in the first place.
I'd like to find out a little bit more about what that experience was like for you, because I similarly find it really difficult, and it's kind of like people either really gravitate towards it or it just can't, they can't kind of connect with it, and I'm one of those. So I'd love for you to share what the experience was of you trying it out.
Yeah, I can't remember much about the details of the app that I used, but it encouraged meditation, which I found I couldn't really do. But just sort of, it would encourage you to just lie back for about 10 minutes and someone would talk at you and just calm you down. And I think that helps quite a lot, having someone guide me through it. I tried yoga recently as well with my friend's class, and I found that really good just to have you can clear your mind, but you still have someone there telling you what to do. And I think that worked quite well.
Okay, so something you might want to pick up again.
Yeah, definitely.
How would you do that? I'd be interested to know, because this is one of the things we're so aware of well-being practices and habits, and of course our whole paddleboard mission is to give insight into how other people do it and hopefully be inspired by it. But it's that taking that step of actually adopting those practices, and particularly when you're in a low place, it's hard to muster the energy to try something different. Do you have any advice?
I would just say just take your time. It's really hard to try and find that balance between pushing yourself but not pushing yourself too far, and then staying comfortable but not getting stuck in your comfort zone. So I think it's just taking baby steps to go forward. I would love to be one of those people that would go to the gym, 2 or 3 times a week, and just get it all out that way. But I'm baby stepping into yoga just for an hour a week, and hopefully it will go from there.
So something about acknowledging where you are and not setting sights too high in an unrealistic way.
Yeah.
Have there been things that you've tried and not managed to, and has that felt self-defeating in some way? Have you?
Yeah, I think going to the gym. I only really found it good when I was with friends, because obviously I felt quite anxious being around loads of people I didn't know, and you just get this idea in your head that everyone is staring at you and judging you. So I would love for that to be my new thing, to go there regularly and just get physically fitter as well.
Well, you mentioned something about kind of perception of how other people perceive you, and how do you cope with that, knowing that people may be looking upon us, and of course we've got these internal views of people are looking at me and they're judging me, etc. Do you have a narrative internally for dealing with that? Yeah,
I think I just repeat to myself, oh, no one cares. Like when I'm walking down the street, I don't care what other people are doing. So it's weird how if you are anxious, you feel like you're simultaneously the most important but the least important person in the world. That everyone's staring at you, but everyone is very dismissive of you. So I think it's just important to remember that everyone's got their own lives and they're probably not really paying attention to what you're doing, just walking down the street.
And how are you with praise and positive feedback?
I'm really bad, to be honest. Yeah, I think it's definite. I was talking about this the other day, just imposter syndrome, where people will compliment me, and if I get a lot of comments on comics where that people are very nice about it, it's sort of like a weird disconnect sometimes, where I'm just like, oh, they don't really mean it. They're just saying it for whatever reason. It's quite hard to accept sometimes.
So theoretically, how does one deal with imposter syndrome?
I think a big part of it is like I said earlier, like it's not arrogant to just be proud of something that you've done. I recognise that I put a lot of time into drawing, and it's okay to be proud of it, and it's not a bad thing to think that you're good at something and to accept praise. It's very healthy and important.
Well said. And what's on the cards for you going forward?
So I'm working with Unbound to publish my own book, which is a collection of comics, and it's also got a few pages of writing as well, sort of interspersed throughout, where I sort of talk about something that inspired a particular comic or what my thoughts on the subject are. And I don't have a exact publication date, but it will be later this year. So I handed in my final editor's notes 2 weeks ago. So that's probably the next big thing.
And what was the process of doing that like?
It was really hard. Yeah, just because in the beginning it was a crowdfunded project. So in the beginning, you think, oh, this is so cool. This will be really fun. And then I think I just convinced myself nothing would happen. And then when it started picking up a bit, I was like, oh, I should probably work on this now because it might be a real thing, and it's very intense to just kind of sit there and slug away, and it kind of I guess it's like if you do it as a job, you feel like the fun gets sucked out of it a little bit, and like you're just doing it for the sake of doing it. So I was very glad when it finished, but overall I think it was a good experience. Yeah.
And if anyone listening or watching you now has a creative talent, but they don't feel worthy or willing to take a risk and put it out there for public consumption, what would you say?
It is scary, like putting yourself out there, but no one is good at something straight away. So just that's the first step, is just doing it and just getting it out there. So don't be afraid to just take that plunge.
Some of the comments are extremely relatable, so it's no wonder that there is such a following, and also all the comments are quite bold and frank, actually, so I can imagine why they would be so appealing. Do you ever feel, and I think you sort of touched on it, like there's a kind of an onus to keep producing these 2 posts a week?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And how do you manage that?
Well, I just try and remember that you shouldn't force yourself to do something if there's nothing there. So I think there's been times where I've said to people online, I'm really sorry, I haven't done any comics. I've just, I've had a bad time or a busy week, and people were nice about it. They're always saying, just take care of yourself and just come back when you're ready. I think it's important just to remember that.
And if anyone out there is feeling at such a low point where they are not, things are so difficult that it's at the point of desperation, any words of advice to people at the lowest of ebbs?
Just that, it might not feel like it, but it will get better, and that there's no shame in talking to someone about how you're feeling and reaching out for it. There's loads of great charities and helplines that you can call, and there's just no shame in asking for help, because I think everyone does deserve to be here, even when you might not think it yourself.
That's great. Anything that you want to ask me about therapy?
How do you think someone like me who's maybe had a bad experience with therapy could just find the courage to go and build it up? Would you say maybe start off slowly and then build up more to regular sessions?
Well, it's interesting. Previous guests have said that it often doesn't, the connection often doesn't happen with the first person that they've seen, and that the best advice they could give is just to try again.
Yeah.
And that often they can tell within the first few seconds or minutes if they're going to gel personality-wise with a therapist, which I found quite interesting. And I'd like to hear your reflections on whether that was the case in your experience, a medical practitioner that you saw. Were you attuned to that early on?
I think so, yeah. I think straight away you can tell if someone is genuinely interested in helping you or not, or if they just want to shove off a quiz to you.
And the other thing, of course, about therapy is that we are fully equipped with all of our own tools, and which is why thank you for sharing all of yours that keep you well. And that's the purpose, is to show other people that we can look after ourselves, and here are some ways of doing so, and that therapy can be an adjunct. It's not for everyone, but of course my view is that everyone can benefit from it, and it's not only in times of deep distress, but it's also that push towards further self-development. Even at even at your strongest point, you can always grow and continue to evolve as a human being.
Yeah, definitely.
Any parting comments?
Thank you for having me. It's been really nice.
Thank you very much, Chuck.
Thank you.
Thank you. HarleyTherapy.com is here to help you book counselling with professional therapists online or in person at the times and prices that suit you, wherever you are worldwide. If this is your first listen to Therapy Lab, do hit subscribe to keep up to date with new episodes. If you feel you'd benefit from therapy and want to transform your life, visit HarleyTherapy.com to find a therapist anywhere in the UK and worldwide via Skype. We'll see you next time.